Okay, I have a fantastic, evocative, provocative, um, very stimulating poem by Robert Creeley to talk about today. It's called For Love. Before I get into it, though, I really should be a more conscientious content creator and proprietor of this little shop and make a pitch for people to subscribe if they haven't already. Um, if you're watching and you haven't subscribed, please consider it if you think it's worthwhile. I've been at this a few months. I'm going to keep doing it. Uh, Whatever it may or may not be doing for others, it's doing a lot for me. And I'm getting more views than I thought I would. I'm not getting a great many, of course. I'm in a large sea of with all kinds of activity out there and all that. So, but when you expect views in the 0 to 5 range, and you get and so anything above that seems miraculous. And I have 20 subscribers at this moment. And if you're one of them, thank you very much. If I was a nice guy, I'd send you all an edible arrangement or something. But in lieu of that, please just accept my thanks. I hope you'll stick with it, and I hope you're getting something out of it. So, okay, let's look at this poem, For Love. The dedication here is for Bobby. Yesterday I wanted to speak of it, that sense above the others to me, important because all that I know derives from what it teaches me. Today, what is it that is finally so helpless, different, despairs of its own statement, wants to turn away, endlessly to turn away? If the moon did not, no, if you did not, I wouldn't either. But what would I not do? What prevention, what thing so quickly stopped? That is love yesterday or tomorrow, not now. Can I eat what you give me? I have not earned it. Must I think of everything as earned? Now love also becomes a reward so remote from me, I have only made it with my mind. Here is tedium, despair, a painful sense of isolation, and whimsical, if pompous, self regard. But that image is only of the mind's vague structure, vague to me because it is my own. Love, what do I think to say? I cannot say it. What have you come to ask? What have I made you into? Companion, good company, crossed legs with skirt, or soft body under the bones of the bed. Nothing says anything but that which it wishes would come true, fears what else might happen in some other place, some other time, not this one. A voice in my place, an echo of that only in yours. Let me stumble into not the confession, but the obsession I begin with now. For you also, some time beyond place, or place beyond time. No mind left to say anything at all, that face gone now. Into the company of love it all returns. So I think that's pretty terrific. Uh, this appeared, I don't remember whether I said at the beginning, this appeared in his book For Love, which came out in the early 60s, though I have it in an anthology. Here it is. Contemporary American Poetry, edited by Donald Hall. This appeared in 1962. It's almost as old as me, and it. I'm sure you can find a battered copy of this in better used bookstores everywhere. But anyway, I was reading off a screen for convenience. So this poem, as I say, was dedicated to and directly addressed to a specific person, namely Creeley's then wife, Bobby Louise Hawkins, an artist and poet in her own right, though I think she hit her stride somewhat later. I'm not sure what she'd been what she'd been doing at the time this was written in the early 60s. And overall, I think it's evident even from a cursory first reading, what's going on here is this struggle on the part of the speaker to understand and express this experience, this phenomenon, this condition of being in love. Um, so, you can, if you think of it as a kind of um, a love letter is an attempt to say something meaningful and intelligible to the beloved person, to convey one's feelings in a way that's comprehensible and, as I say, meaningful to that person. Um, And you have to note that he doesn't manage to do that here. And there's a continual note of strain or tension or struggle in his repeated failure to do that. We see the way that he's reduced to talking around the subject rather than penetrating it and saying something and capturing its essence, its fundamental character. Um, and he attempts again and again. He comes at it from one place, one angle, and fails and stops. He abandons that attempt. He comes back again uh, to try again, and only to fail again. So we see this reckoning or grappling with the inexpressibility of, the opacity of this feeling, um, and we're made to consider um, that there's something about this state, uh, being in love, that disturbingly seems to repel all attempts to characterize it or even conceive of it clearly. Um, it seems to be something that is vital to us and at the same time strange and foreign to us and in a way threatening. Um, Something that kind of exposes our isolated individuality and um, our our incompleteness in a way, or our brokenness, or something of that sort. And I think that sense is reinforced not just by what he's saying, but by the formal elements and the way the thing is set up and built. Um, we note that the stanzas don't, and this is not unique to this poem by any means. I mean, this would be um, rather familiar feature of a lot of modern poetry, post World War I poetry, with where form kind of became more elastic. The stanzas don't encapsulate whole thoughts or ideas or topics or any kind of rounded kind of impression. The substance of what he's saying in each stanza, the thoughts here exceed the stanzas and spill into the next one. They kind of straddles them, and there's a tension created by that. It's produced by that in the disjunction between these structural and visual divisions on the one hand and what they signify on the other. And just as a point of contrast, what did I do with it? Um, I'm going to read one stanza by from a poem by Thomas Hardy that I like awfully well, and I may devote one of these to it at some point. It's called "The Darkling Thrush." I'm just going to read the first stanza. I leant upon a coppice gate when frost was spectre gray, and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day. The tangled vine stems scored the sky like strings of broken lyres, and all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. So that's the end of the first stanza. The land's sharp features seemed to be the century's corpse outlent. So that's the beginning of the second one, and so where there's a switch to a new topic or some kind of new perspective, and apart from the regularized um, syllabic construction and the rhyming, what he's talking about, the substance of what he's talking about is is contained within the physical limits of each stanza, and but that's not what's going on here. So, just to take a look at the first one again, uh, the first stanza of "For Love." Yesterday I wanted to speak of it, that sense above the others to me, important because all. Then we go to the second stanza, that I know derives from what it teaches me. Today, what is it that is finally so helpless? Going to the third stanza, different, despairs of its own, etc. So you begin with. In some ways, this is a very regular. It has a very regular form. It's got an even number of stanzas, 16. They're quatrains and short lines, and I'll get to that in a second. And you get to the end of the first one, and you don't have a complete thought, or there's something you're hanging. There's a little bit of anxiety there. There's a little bit of tension there. That you're not gonna get the payoff you're looking for. And no matter how much modern poetry you've read, how old a hand you are at the liberties that are taken with form, since World War One and in our own day. I think there's a part of you that wants um, that will experience some kind of reflexive anxiety at coming to the conclusion of a clearly demarcated stanza and not getting that payoff, not getting that sense of completeness. And I think all that's working very well. I guess, as I say, it's not unique to this poem at all, but that kind of works very well with this poem and kind of reinforces what he's saying and struggling with as he attempts to understand and express to his wife his feelings for her. Um, so another thing that creates some tension are these really short lines. I don't think they give a feeling of constraint, constriction. It's as though the language is being forced into this narrow groove that runs vertically down the page. And I think of Walt Whitman as a contrast with that. He has a very long line. It has this kind of freely breathing and exploratory sort of character, and you don't have that here. Creeley is not moving freely. Um, that was not an intentional rhyme, but he's not moving freely. He's continually butting his head up against the limit, and it's almost as though the language is kind of straitjacketed. It kind of makes that impression on me as I read it, and as these ideas pile up, and as these repeated attempts to these repeated failed attempts to say something meaningful about love. Um, uh, he seems imprisoned by language um, and is reduced to a kind of helplessness. Um, so I think that's an interesting feature of it. I think maybe the most interesting and stimulating moment in the poem is, let's see, it's the stanza, it's the fourth stanza, and it begins, "If the moon did not, no, if you did not, I wouldn't either." Um, yeah, and it's very interesting. He starts with this reference to the moon, which is a very standard trope in love poetry, and in poetry and love poetry in particular. Um, it often represents the female principle or female sexuality. Um, partly because and if you see misogyny in this, I wouldn't dream of quarreling with you. But the moon is passive in a sense, at least as compared with the sun, which is often made to represent the male principle. It doesn't generate its own light; it reflects the light of the sun. It's sort of the light of the sun is kind of thrust upon it, you might say, and it's a fairly standard trope that he kind of automatically falls into, then stops himself and rejects it and says, "No, you, not the poem." So he finds himself in his inability to say what he wants to say, taking refuge in conventional tropes of love. This one conventional trope of love, um, but seems to realize that he would be playing false with the subject. Now, an ordinary person writing a love letter would probably happily adopt the standard tropes and conventional modes of expression. But the poet is more scrupulous, more searching, more responsible in a way, more conscientious about language, its power and also its limitations, and its liabilities and its pitfalls. So he's attempting to really be an honest broker about this. So the moon metaphor is rejected because it seems far from affording a new perspective on this idea, this phenomenon, or penetrating it. He seems to see it instead as an occasion or a means of concealment, of deflection, as a barrier, as something that obscures rather than clarifies. Very interesting. There's another thing that he does, and again, this isn't peculiar to this poem or to modern poetry. I mean, any kind of verbal expression. But he asks questions. He asks a number of questions in this poem that do not end with question marks, they end with periods. And any one of us might do that, because if we ask a question and we want it to have a certain, we want to ask this question and it is a question, but we want it to have a certain intonation, we may feel that that intonation would be spoiled or taken in a wrong direction if you use a question mark. And so it may not come through in the inner ear of a of the recipient by using a question mark. I mean, I tend to do that myself sometimes, but in this case, um, again, it works in the whole, and helps to reinforce this notion of how poor and inadequate an instrument of expression language is in the face of this subject. Um, Questions, I think they have no question marks because they're, in a way, they're hard facts. They don't lead anywhere. Um, they don't get an answer. There is no answer. They signify opacity. They don't act as regular questions where it's a question is the prelude to finding something else out. It's an attempt to find something out, and it's sort of step one, and then step two is getting an answer. There are no answers. They signify opacity rather than interrogate and inquire after some other signification that can be clearly apprehended and spoken. There's nothing beyond the question that we can conceptually grasp and embody in words. Um, each of them is really a terminus. And so the terminal punctuation mark is entirely apt, as I see it. So um, I think that's very interesting. So I'm not going to do a really terribly close reading of every little element in this, because I don't think that's necessarily the way to do it. I kind of want to just try to open pathways for your own reflection about this, rather than because I think it's a mistake to look at a poem and expect everything that's mentioned to have some specific meaning. I think that it's a little bit, it can be more holistic than that, and I tend to look at this poem that way. So I think it just stimulates lots of reflections about love. I mean, think how commonplace it is to see couples together, and yet how stubbornly other this phenomenon is. I mean, it's amazing to think of how many people have and do and will have something of this experience, at least at moments or to some degree. So it's this kind of unfathomably exotic thing, and it's just completely commonplace at the same time. Um, and I think we keep seeing him running aground in the face of this, the indeterminacy of this, and in its peculiar way, at the very same time that it ties us as closely as one can be tied to another human being, emotionally or spiritually, what have you, um, exposing to us in a disturbing way our this ultimately unbridgeable isolation as individuals and this incompleteness, and it's destabilizing in a way that can produce tremendous anxiety. I mean, the irony, or maybe of this, is that what is closest to us, the person that's closest to us, or what we experience in our relation to the one person in all the world closest to us, perhaps, and most familiar to us, is at the same time the most remote and the most obscure. And this seems inherent to this relation, definitional and kind of constitutive, not some kind of incidental feature or kind of collateral effect. It seems really essential. So, I think where you end up is in failing to say something, affirmative, failing to say something that has a kind of positive consistency about love. He may be putting his finger on what is most characteristic, what is most fundamentally true about love. And I think that's the remarkable thing that he manages to do here. So I think that is all I'm going to say about this right now. And I will read it again. For love. Yesterday I wanted to speak of it, that sense above the others to me important because all that I know derives from what it teaches me. Today, what is it that is finally so helpless, different, despairs of its own statement, wants to turn away, endlessly to turn away? If the moon did not, no, if you did not, I wouldn't either. But what would I not do? What prevention? What thing so quickly stopped? That is love yesterday or tomorrow, not now. Can I eat what you give me? I have not earned it. Must I think of everything as earned? Now love also becomes a reward, so remote from me I have only made it with my mind. Here is tedium, despair, a painful sense of isolation, and whimsical, if pompous, self regard. But that image is only of the mind's vague structure, vague to me because it is my own. Love, what do I think to say? I cannot say it. What have you come to ask? What have I made you into? Companion, good company, crossed legs with skirt, or soft body under the bones of the bed. Nothing says anything but that which it wishes would come true, fears what else might happen in some other place, some other time, not this one. A voice in my place, an echo of that only in yours. Let me stumble into not the confession, but the obsession I begin with now. For you also, some time beyond place, or place beyond time, no mind left to say anything at all, that face gone now, into the company of love, it all returns. Okay, so let me just note some of the, I should have when I was talking about the questions with periods. Um, let's see. Today, what is it that is finally so helpless, different, despairs of its own statement, wants to turn away endlessly to turn away, period. That's a question, period. Um, what would I not do? What prevention? What thing so quickly stopped, period. Can I eat what you give me, period. Must I think of everything as earned, period, et cetera, et cetera. All through this poem. Um, and I think it's very powerful the way they seem to mark the place of this failure of language and of our conceptual structures to apprehend this this state that is so valued uh, and so common in a way, so everyday, um, and yet so strange and so remote from us. So anyway, I hope you like the poem, and I think it would reward very close attention. So I hope you agree, and I hope you'll give it some. Okay, next time.